On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, job one for everyone if the IC gets a reorg.
Got to remember the adversary is busy all the time, so we can't have a situation where things are being moved or people are being realigned or anything like that where there is a gap in our security and capabilities.
Former ODNI and DOD CIO John Sherman on this edition of FedGov Today in just a moment. First, though, the technical data management transformation's underway at the Defense Logistics Agency. DLA says it'll, quote, provide a faster, more efficient approach to item management at the agency. DLA's Kenneth Watson, the Land and Maritime Acting Commander, will tell you about it on the next FedGov Today podcast coming Thursday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your shows. You can always listen on demand, too, at fedgovtoday.com. The Intelligence Community Efficiency and Effectiveness Act of 2025 will reshape the size and mission of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence if Congress passes it and President Trump signs it. The bill proposes changes to other parts of the intelligence community, too. John Sherman is Dean of the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. He's former Chief Information Officer at ODNI and the Defense Department. He's writing about the reform plan on LinkedIn. His views are his own and not those of any organization. John, welcome. It's great to talk to you again. Thanks for joining me today. You write that this hits the mark, you say, on LinkedIn for the most part, this legislation. Why so? What about it do you see here that you think will be helpful to the way the intelligence community operates? Welcome, John.
Francis, good to be with you here. I think that the overall intent is in the right direction. ODNI established for what I know is very good reason after the tragic terrorist attacks of 9/11 to be able to synthesize, bring together the intelligence community with law enforcement and others to ensure we never, ever had another gap where one part of the community didn't know or have information that the other part had. Super noble intent on that. But over the last 21 years, as with any organization, it's grown and grown and grown. And I think now is probably a good time to start to prune it back a bit. Now, I said mostly on the mark. There's a few parts I'm concerned about, like the potential dissolution of the National Intelligence University, which I do think is a real force multiplier, a great program. But in total, as someone who served at ODNI twice, once on the National Intelligence Council for 3 years, and then, as you noted, as the Intelligence Community CIO under the Trump administration, that I think it's time to bring this back a bit. Not lose the intent, but it sprawled a bit and to bring it home.
You write about the National Intelligence Centers in this piece, and I read from clearancejobs.com, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence will shed several national intelligence centers, repealing semi-annual reporting requirements and removing authority to place personnel arbitrarily within new centers. What is it about the center structure that you think makes more sense to have those organizations in different places?
One, they're so big. They're like agencies unto themselves. And ODNI set up, in my judgment, as a headquarters entity having operational agencies like NCTC, National Counterterrorism Center, or the National Counterproliferation Center. Either one of those, and the National Counterintelligence Security Center. These are really operational entities. And I think moving these to the extent practicable to CIA or FBI is really, they are operational line agencies. Now, what you don't want to have happen is where if one agency is essentially overseeing it, that it's only their personnel populating the organization. You don't want to lose the cross-pollination, the crosswalk of different trade crafts and authorities. That gets us into a pre-9/11 posture. But this brings ODNI back to being a headquarters element, not an operational element. So there's going to have to be a good handoff here and some thoughtfulness by the agency heads, whether at the Bureau or CIA. But I think this is probably a good thing to go ahead and devolve those to the individual agencies.
You mentioned NIU a moment ago, John. Is the output, the outcomes of NIU, are those produced, replicated any place else in the government where those functions could go? Or is there some similar organization whereby that curriculum could go, where the people that come out of it could still come out of it?
I think you have areas like the National Defense University and the Eisenhower School associated with NDU and the National War College, and I go down the list there, What made NIU, at least in my judgment, special was the wonderful instructors there, the students and the collaboration they would get, and the classified venue they were in to be able to do work and theses and other types of production in a top secret SCI setting, where the entire school was in a SCIF there in Bethesda, the old NGA building, now the ODNI building there. I thought there was a lot of power added to that. Over the years, I've had a chance to go lecture there and be able to answer questions in a classified setting. So to your point, I think there are some areas, perhaps, and I know I'm speaking in my personal capacity, but areas like the Bush School, where we do have some SCIF capabilities in some of our facilities here on campus, but others, I'm sure, in the DC area. But this is an area why I'm worried about it. Why reinvent something? And this is, I know it costs money, and as we're trying to get efficiencies, my recommendation would be, if anyone wanted to hear it, move it to DIA, which has been talked about, or back to DIA, I would say, but make sure they have the funding and the GDIP to be able to do this, and not lose that ability of students, that GS, whatever, that Army lieutenant colonel or major, to be able to go write a top secret level paper on something like air defense capabilities and doctrine and country and what we're seeing in Ukraine or something like that. Don't lose that ability. That's what my concern is there.
There's a lot more to this, and we'll put information about it on the show page today at fedgovtoday.com so folks can read about what the legislation intends. The biggest challenge here, it strikes me, is moving any governmental organization to some other place, whether it's just on an org chart or whether it's an actual physical move from one location to another. What are some of the risks that you see that maybe are the same as any other organization in government moving from one place to another, or changing reporting structure or any of that? And are there risks in a reorg in an intelligence community setting that aren't the same as some other federal government or some other private sector reorg effort?
Tremendously. Well, in addition to maintaining current operations, as we like to say, the old adage, rebuilding the plane while it's still flying, or the engine is always running. As counterterrorism and counterintelligence organizations and people and structures are moved, got to remember the adversary is busy all the time. So we can't have a situation where things are being moved or people are being realigned or anything like that where there is a gap in our security and capabilities. That's my biggest worry. And then there are the devil in the details issues, as you noted, the money pieces of this, authorities. And this is where I think real leadership is going to have to make sure we don't do something that creates that seam where some bit of intelligence received by one part of the community that will prevent the terrorist attack, the missile attack, or something nefarious against U.S. or our allies being swept aside, or because someone didn't have authorization to see something. And look, it's never going to be foolproof, but that's my worry. This is, to your point, this is going to be the trickiest part of this, is not just doing a new line and block chart, but doing a warm handoff on this. It's almost in the Army where you have a fighting withdrawal and another unit comes up to take another unit's place. That is one of the trickiest maneuvers that can be done here. And this is kind of like that. So I would recommend that a lot of due diligence go into the process to make sure we don't drop the ball on this.
You anticipated my next question, John, which is, where are there examples that you've seen of organizations who know how to do this kind of handoff that the IC could crib, borrow, model, whatever you want to call it, as it does whatever it is this legislation winds up calling for it to do?
In addition to the military, Francis, I think there are some other areas in business. There are nimble business organizations that routinely are able to affect change at speed of mission. Now, one could argue maybe they're not doing things like protecting life and limb and national security, but tapping into those organizations, this is one thing in my IC career I was really blessed to do, is to go to different training seminars and go to different industry partners to see how they could move at the economic speed of agility to stay competitive in an industry. and I'm sure smart minds are thinking of this, but not reinventing the wheel about how one subunit or set of subunits moves between organizations and the supply chain isn't interrupted, or the technological output or the signal stays on, or the software patches are still being pushed out on schedule. This is done pretty routinely, I think, and I know it's an apples and oranges thing between industry and the IC, but there are people out there who know how to do this. And I would also make sure, as we're looking at efficiencies, let's not send a whole lot of money to integrators, and I mean this with respect to them. This shouldn't be a net huge windfall for folks to come in and profit from this. There's going to need to be help, but there's also going to need to this is going to have to be done economically on behalf of the taxpayer, and I think what the drafters of the legislation intended.
Final thought, John. A number of the previous administrations have made a point in discussing the importance of allies and partners in intelligence gathering efforts, in national security, national defense efforts. How would you recommend that someone effectively go about explaining what this means to allies and partners so they can be assured that we're going to keep the engine running while we're doing this and be able to interact with them in a way that they expect and depend on?
I think it's going to be on mission output, on what the outcomes are going to be. I think it's going to have to be the emphasis that ODNI, as I understand the proposed legislation, isn't going away. There's still going to be a DNI. There's going to be many of the headquarters elements there, that firm handshake is going to continue to exist. But some of the operational parts for counterterrorism, for example, are going to be in a different area. Already, that relationship, for example, with NCTC and the CIA's Counterterrorism Mission Center, for my optic, have always been pretty tight. And as you're working with allies, say in the UK or Ottawa or elsewhere, they're pretty used to these relationships. And we have watched our allies do different organizational things. I saw that on the GEOINT front, for example, in the UK, as they move things around to RAF Witten and elsewhere. I think communication is key, and ensuring that these abilities to get information back and forth aren't interrupted. And if they are, that you fix it in a hurry. And so communication with our allies and transparency is going to be critical to make sure we don't lose anything in translation with them.
It's always delightful to catch up with you, John. I appreciate your input, and thank you for taking some time to talk to me today.
And Francis, thank you for the time, and I wish the men and women of ODNI all the very best, and thank them for all they've done for the past 21 years. It's been an honor to serve with them, and I wish them the best of luck.
You can read more about the legislation to reshape ODNI and find a link to John's LinkedIn post on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Don't forget, Kenneth Watson from DLA is on the next FedGov Today podcast. That's coming Thursday, and you can listen to every FedGov Today podcast anytime you want on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on demand at fedgovtoday.com. I'm Francis Rose. Thanks for listening.